Boron stared, stunned, at the blood-soaked face of the foolhardy human Philip, unable to process the insanity of his actions. "Why would you do this?" the Tarkalian official thought. "Why would you risk your life to save an alien you just met?" It was utterly illogical, irrational. Yet as Tarkalian medics rushed Philip's broken body to the nearest infirmary, Boron couldn't shake a gnawing sense of doubt. Humanity's reputation preceded them. They were an emotional, unpredictable species known for their rapid technological advancement and aggressive expansion across the stars. That's why Boron had been tasked with leading first contact, to assess the threat posed by these strange creatures. But he hadn't expected this. Philip leaping into the line of fire as xenophobic extremists opened fire on the delegation, using his own body to shield Boron from the deadly plasma bolts. Several humans were already dead, their crimson blood staining the gleaming floor of the landing pad. The extremists had been subdued, but the damage was done. As word of the attack spread, Tarkus Prime descended into chaos. Some called for the humans to be expelled immediately, before their madness could infect Tarkalian society. They were too dangerous, too unstable to reason with. Others, like Boron, began to question everything they thought they knew. Perhaps there was more to these creatures than met the eye. But as riots erupted in the streets and warships took up positions in orbit, one thing became terrifyingly clear. The fate of both their species hung in the balance. If Philip died, if the tenuous threads of diplomacy snapped, it could mean a war that would consume the galaxy. Boron hurried towards the infirmary, dreading the difficult path ahead. The human delegation's mission of peace had gone horribly wrong. Now, everything depended on the irrational bravery of one man, a man who was willing to give his life for a stranger. A man named Philip. As Philip waited anxiously outside the operating room, his mind raced with thoughts of the challenges ahead. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of progress and setbacks, hope and fear. He and Boron had worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between their species, organizing joint task forces and cultural exchange programs. For a moment, it seemed like peace was within reach. But Zorak's faction had other plans. The extremist leader had escalated his attacks, targeting both human and Tarkalian civilians in a bid to sow chaos and division. Philip and Boron had been on a fact-finding mission in a remote province when they stumbled upon evidence of Zorak's latest plot, a plan to seize control of a Tarkalian military installation and its arsenal of advanced weapons. They had raced back to the capital to warn the council and the human crew, but Zorak's followers were waiting for them. The ambush had been brutal. Philip could still hear the sound of plasma bolts sizzling through the air, the cries of pain as Boron fell to the ground, his blue blood pooling on the dusty street. Somehow, Philip had managed to escape, fighting his way through the hostile streets and back alleys of the city. He had contacted his crew, warning them of the imminent threat. They had already begun to suspect something was amiss, noticing unusual activity around their ship. Together, they had pieced together the horrifying truth. Zorak was planning to launch a devastating strike on the human delegation, framing it as an accident to turn public opinion against them and force their expulsion from Tarkus Prime. Time was running out. Philip and his crew had devised a desperate plan to stop Zorak and protect both the human delegation and the Tarkalian population. Philip would lead a covert mission to infiltrate the compromised military base, while his crew worked with loyal Tarkalian forces to evacuate civilians and secure key infrastructure. The battle had been fierce. Philip's team, consisting of his trusted Lieutenant Marcus and a handful of Tarkalian allies, had fought their way through the base, engaging in a high-stakes game of cat-and-mouse with Zorak's followers. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had one advantage: human ingenuity. Philip and his team had used every trick in the book to gain the upper hand, improvising weapons and traps from the base's own systems. They had managed to neutralize Zorak's superweapon, a massive plasma cannon capable of obliterating the human ship from orbit. In the end, they had cornered Zorak himself, forcing the radical leader to surrender. But even in defeat, Zorak had been defiant. He had taunted Philip, claiming that even if he failed, Others would continue his mission to purge Tarkus Prime of human influence. Philip had refused to give in to hatred and fear, arguing that cooperation and understanding were the only ways forward. To his surprise, some of Zorak's own followers had been swayed by his words, laying down their arms and surrendering. Now, as Philip waited for news of Boran's fate, he felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, exhaustion, uncertainty. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the future was still uncertain. He knew that he and his crew would be hailed as heroes, but the real work was just beginning. They would have to turn the ideals of unity and collaboration into a lasting reality, building a brighter future for both their species in an uncertain galaxy. The door to the operating room hissed open, and a weary-looking Tarkalian surgeon emerged. Philip leapt to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. "How is he?" Philip asked, his voice rough with emotion. The surgeon managed a tired smile. "He's stable," she said. "It was touch and go for a while, but he's a fighter. He'll pull through." Philip felt a wave of relief wash over him. Boran was alive. They had won. But as he looked out the window at the shimmering spires of the Tarkalian capital, he knew that their mission was just the beginning. The real work was just beginning. Philip stood at the viewport of the research vessel Horizon, watching the stars streak by as they hurtled through space. Boran joined him, his blue skin shimmering under the soft cabin lights. "We're approaching the Kepler system," Boran said. "Initial scans look promising." Philip nodded, excitement building despite the weight of recent events. "Let's hope we find something worth all this trouble." As they prepared to drop out of FTL, alarms blared through the ship. Philip rushed to the bridge, Boran close behind. "Report!" Philip barked. The communications officer, a young Tarkalian named Zira, looked up with wide eyes. "We're receiving a distress call from Outpost Sigma 9. Philip and Boran exchanged worried glances. Sigma 9 was on the very edge of Tarkalian space, a small research station studying cosmic phenomena. "Play it," Boran ordered. Static crackled, then a panicked voice came through. "This is Sigma 9. We're under attack by unknown hostiles. They've breached the..." The transmission cut off abruptly. Philip clenched his fists. "Set a course for Sigma 9, maximum speed." Hours later, they arrived at a scene of devastation. The outpost was a wreck, huge chunks torn from its hull. Bodies floated in the vacuum, both Tarkalian and human. "Life signs?" Philip asked tersely. "Faint readings from the central hub," an officer reported. Philip turned to Boran. "We're going in." They docked with the ruined station, Philip leading a team of humans and Tarkalians into the airless corridors. They found survivors huddled in a sealed lab, terrified and injured. As they evacuated the shocked scientists, one grabbed Philip's arm. "The Draxians," he whispered. "They came out of nowhere, killed everyone they could find." Back on the horizon, Philip and Boran listened to the survivors' accounts with growing horror. The Draxians were unlike anything they'd encountered, ruthless, powerful, driven by an insatiable bloodlust. "We need to inform our governments," Boran said grimly. But as they sent their reports, the responses were frustratingly cautious. Both human and Tarkalian officials urged restraint, calling for more information before taking action. Philip pounded his fist on the console. "We can't just sit here while they slaughter more innocent people." Boran's antenna twitched in agitation. "I agree, but what can we do?" Philip's eyes gleamed with purpose. "We go back. We find out everything we can about these Draxians, and we save anyone left alive." Despite the risks, they formulated a plan. Using Tarkalian cloaking technology and human infiltration tactics, they would sneak onto the captured outpost. Philip led the strike team, with his trusted friend Marcus at his side. They slipped past Draxion patrols, witnessing firsthand the aliens' terrifying strength and savagery. In the command center, they found a handful of survivors and a wealth of data on the Draxians, but their luck didn't hold. As they attempted to escape, a Draxian commander spotted them. The battle was chaos. Philip's team fought desperately, using every trick they knew against the physically superior Draxians. They managed to hold their own until Marcus went down, a Draxian energy weapon burning through his suit. Philip didn't hesitate. He scooped up his wounded friend and ran, the team providing covering fire. They barely made it to the shuttle as the outpost exploded behind them, the Draxion's final act of destruction. On the journey home, Philip sat by Marcus's bed in the medbay, his friend's life hanging by a thread. The rescued Tarkalian scientist approached, clutching a datapad. "I know why they're here," she said softly. "The Draxians, they're driven by a biological imperative to conquer and destroy. They won't stop until the galaxy burns." Philip looked up, his eyes hard. "Then we'll stop them first." But as they returned to their homeworlds, Philip and Boron found themselves facing a new battle. Political factions argued fiercely over how to respond to the Draxian threat. Some called for immediate military action, others for attempts at diplomacy. In a joint session of human and Tarkalian leadership, Philip stood before the assembled delegates. "I've seen what the Draxians can do," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "We can't afford to wait. We must stand together or we'll fall alone." Boron stepped up beside him. "Our alliance has already achieved the impossible. Now we face our greatest challenge. Will we rise to meet it?" As the debate raged on, Philip and Boron exchanged determined looks. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side, for the sake of both their peoples and the future of the galaxy itself. As the threat of the Draxians loomed, Philip and Boron worked tirelessly to strengthen the alliance between their peoples. They spent long hours in strategy meetings, poring over intelligence reports and coordinating joint military exercises. One evening, as they left the Tarkalian High Council chambers, Philip noticed a hooded figure lurking in the shadows. He grabbed Boron's arm, pulling him back just as a plasma bolt sizzled past, leaving a scorched mark on the ornate wall. "Get down!" Philip shouted, tackling Boron to the ground as more shots rang out. Security forces swarmed the area, but the assassin had vanished. As they huddled behind a pillar, Boron's antenna twitched nervously. "This was no random attack," Boron said, his voice low. "Someone doesn't want us to succeed." Philip nodded grimly. "We need to find out who's behind this." In the days that followed, they dug deeper into the political landscape of both their worlds. They uncovered whispers of a powerful Tarkalian senator named Krelax, who had been vocal in his opposition to the alliance. "He's not working alone," Marcus reported during a secure briefing. "We've detected communications between Krelax and a human admiral named Adrian Harding. They're coordinating something big." Philip frowned. "Harding, I've heard rumors about him. He commands a renegade fleet, doesn't he?" Zara, a sharp-eyed Tarkalian intelligence officer, nodded. "Yes, and we believe they're planning to sabotage our joint operations." As they spoke, alarms blared throughout the command center. A junior officer burst in, his face pale. "Sir, we've lost contact with Outpost Zeta 7. Philip and Boron rushed to the communications array. Static filled the speakers, punctuated by screams and the sound of weapons fire. Then, silence. "Draxians," Boron said, his voice tight. "They're testing our defenses." Philip hit his fist on the console. "We need to respond fast. But with Krelax and Harding working against us..." They worked around the clock, coordinating rescue efforts and bolstering defenses. But at every turn, they faced setbacks. Supply shipments went missing, communication relays failed, and troop deployments were delayed. "This is their doing," Boron growled, gesturing at a map showing their latest losses. "We need proof to expose them." Philip turned to Marcus and Zara. "You two are our best hope. Can you infiltrate Krelax's inner circle?" The human and Tarkalian agents nodded, persistence etched on their faces. "We'll find what you need," Marcus promised. Days later, as Philip and Boron attended a diplomatic summit to shore up support for the alliance, chaos erupted. Explosions rocked the building, and armed assailants stormed the conference room. Philip dove for cover, pulling Boron with him. They crawled behind an overturned table as plasma bolts scorched the air above them. "This way!" a security officer shouted, gesturing toward a hidden exit. They ran, ducking and weaving through the corridors. As they reached the extraction point, Philip saw a flash of movement. He shoved Boron aside just as a Tarkalian assassin lunged forward, energy blade humming. Philip grappled with the attacker, their struggle fierce and desperate. He managed to disarm the assassin, but not before the blade sliced through his uniform, leaving a burning gash across his ribs. As security forces subdued the remaining attackers, Philip leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. Boron examined his wound, concern evident in his multifaceted eyes. "That was too close," Boron said. "They're getting bolder." Philip nodded, wincing as he straightened up. "But now we know for sure. Krelax and Harding are behind this. We need to stop them before it's too late." As they made their way to a secure location, reports flooded in of more Draxian attacks on outlying colonies. The enemy was advancing, and time was running out. Philip and Boron exchanged grim looks. They had to root out the traitors in their midst and unite their forces, or both their civilizations would fall to the Draxian onslaught. The real battle was just beginning. Philip Perry stood at the helm of the Horizon, his eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the Draxion staging area. The barren moon loomed before them, its cratered surface hiding the enemy's forces. "All units, prepare for drop," Philip's voice rang out over the comm. "Remember, we hit hard and fast, cripple their supplies and get out." The strike force descended through the moon's thin atmosphere, their drop pods streaking across the sky like meteors. As they touched down, Philip's boots hit the dusty surface with a thud. He raised his plasma rifle, scanning the horizon. "Move out," he ordered, and the mixed squad of humans and Tarkalians fanned out across the lunar landscape. They hadn't gone far when the first Draxion patrol appeared. The aliens were massive, easily twice the size of a human, with thick, armored hides and razor-sharp claws. Their eyes gleamed with savage intelligence as they charged. Philip dove behind a boulder, plasma bolts sizzling past his head. "Concentrate fire!" he shouted. The air filled with the whine of energy weapons as the strike force engaged. A Tarkalian soldier fell, his chest torn open by Draxion claws. Philip gritted his teeth and kept firing. Wave after wave of Draxians came at them. The human Tarkalian force pushed forward, leaving a trail of alien corpses in their wake. But the cost was high. Philip watched as good soldiers, friends, fell to the relentless assault. Through the chaos, he spotted Marcus. His lieutenant was holding a narrow pass, allowing wounded troops to fall back. As Philip watched, a Draxian warrior lunged at Marcus, its energy blade slicing through his armor. "Marcus!" Philip screamed, fighting his way toward his friend. He reached Marcus just as the soldier collapsed. Blood seeped from a deep gash across his chest. Philip dragged him behind cover, calling for a medic. "Sir!" Marcus gasped, his face pale. "There's too many. We need to end this now." Philip looked at the Draxian stronghold looming ahead, then back at his wounded friend. He made his decision. "This is Commander Perry," he barked into his comm, "requesting immediate orbital strike on these coordinates." There was a pause. "Sir, that's danger close to your position," came the response. "I know, do it." The sky lit up as energy beams rained down from orbit. The ground shook, and Philip threw himself over Marcus, shielding him from the debris. When the dust settled, Philip looked up. The Draxian base was a smoking ruin. But as he surveyed his battered forces, he knew the victory had come at a terrible price. A voice crackled over the comm. "Commander, we're picking up a distress signal. It's from the Tarkalian colony on Zen 9. Philip's heart sank. There was no time to rest. He turned to his troops, saw the exhaustion in their eyes. "I know you're tired," he said, "but our allies need us. Who's with me?" The response was immediate. Human and Tarkalian alike, they stood ready to fight again. Aboard the Horizon, Philip conferred with Boron. The Tarkalian's antennae twitched with agitation as they studied the tactical display. "The Draxions have a blockade here," Boron said, pointing to a cluster of enemy ships. "We'll never break through in time." Philip frowned. Then his eyes lit up. What if we don't go through them? What if we go around them? Boron's multifaceted eyes blinked. A series of short-range warp jumps? It's risky, but it might work. They put the plan into action. The fleet jumped in and out of warp, each time appearing closer to the besieged colony. The Draxions, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. As they dropped out of warp for the final time, Philip gave the order. All ships, open fire. The space around Zen 9 erupted in a furious battle. Tarkalian cruisers and human destroyers fought side by side, their weapons tearing into the Draxion ships. On the surface, dropships deployed troops to engage the ground forces threatening the colony. Philip led a team to secure the colonial capital. They fought through the streets, liberating terrified colonists and pushing back the Draxion invaders. As the last enemy ship fled the system, a cheer went up from the Allied forces. But Philip couldn't join in the celebration. He made his way to the medical bay, where Marcus lay on a gurney, his breathing shallow. "Did we win?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. Philip took his hand. "We did. You did good, soldier." Marcus smiled faintly, then his eyes closed for the last time. Philip bowed his head, grief washing over him. Later, as Philip and Boron stood on the observation deck of the horizon, the weight of their victories and losses hung heavy between them. "We've bought some time," Boron said quietly, "but the real battle is yet to come." Philip nodded grimly. "The Draxion Emperor, we need to be ready." As if in response to his words, a junior officer approached, his face grave. "Sirs, we've just received a priority communication. You need to see this." The message was chilling. Long-range scans had detected a massive fleet approaching, the main Draxion armada, led by the Emperor himself. Philip and Boron exchanged looks. They knew what had to be done. "Prepare a transmission to both our governments," Philip said. "It's time to put aside our differences. The fate of both our species hangs in the balance." As they drafted their plea for unity, Philip couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenge lay not in the stars, but in the hearts and minds of those they sought to protect. The Draxions were coming, but would humanity and the Tarkalians be ready to stand as one? The aftermath of the Zen 9 battle left a bitter taste in the mouths of both human and Tarkalian forces. Whispers of discontent spread through the ranks like a virus. In the mess hall of the horizon, Philip overheard a group of soldiers talking in hushed tones. "We lost half our squad for what? A hunk of rock?" one of them muttered. "The Draxions just keep coming. There's no end in sight," another added. Philip's eyes hardened as he walked away. He knew morale was at an all-time low, but hearing it firsthand sent a chill down his spine. In his quarters, Boron paced back and forth, his antennae twitching with agitation. "Our forces are fracturing, Philip. We need to address this now." Before Philip could respond, an urgent message flashed on his comm device. His eyes widened as he read it. "We've got a bigger problem. Admiral Jared Blackwood and General Thrax are planning a coup." Boron's multifaceted eyes blinked rapidly. "How?" "They're exploiting the unrest, promising a quick end to the war through negotiations with the Draxions." As they scrambled to formulate a response, alarms blared throughout the ship. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Alert! Multiple installations under attack. Shipyard Delta and Munitions Depot Gamma have fallen to rebel forces." Philip pounded his fist against the wall. "We're too late. They've already made their move." In the command center, chaos reigned. Officers shouted orders as reports flooded in from across the sector. Philip surveyed the tactical display, his mind racing. "We need to act fast," he said, turning to Boron. "If we lose those facilities, we lose the war." A young lieutenant approached, her face a mask of willpower. "Commander Perry, Lieutenant Jessica Ramirez reporting for duty. I want to help take these traitors down." Philip nodded, recognizing the fire in her eyes. "Your father would be proud, Lieutenant. We'll need every loyal soldier we can get." They quickly assembled strike teams, briefing them on the gravity of the situation. Philip led the assault on the shipyard, while Boron coordinated the overall strategy. The battle for the shipyard was brutal. Philip's team fought their way through corridors filled with smoke and sparking electrical panels. Plasma bolts sizzled past their heads as they pushed forward, inch by bloody inch. "Hold the line!" Philip shouted, ducking behind a fallen bulkhead. He popped up, firing his rifle in short, controlled bursts. 2 rebel soldiers fell, their bodies crumpling to the deck. After hours of intense combat, they secured the shipyard. But the victory was short-lived. Reports came in of the munitions depot still firmly under rebel control. "Sir, they've got experimental plasma cannons," a breathless scout reported. "Our shields can't stop them." Philip's mind raced. They needed those weapons destroyed before they could be used against the Loyalist forces. He turned to his team, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "I'm leading a team in. We'll sabotage those cannons from the inside." They infiltrated the depot under the cover of a coordinated assault led by Boron. Philip's small team moved silently through the shadows, avoiding patrols and disabling security systems. As they neared the main storage area, all hell broke loose. Elite guards swarmed them from all sides. Philip's team fought desperately, the air thick with plasma fire and the screams of the wounded. They reached the plasma cannons, but found themselves pinned down by heavy fire. Lieutenant Ramirez worked furiously to sabotage the weapons while Philip and the others provided cover. "Almost there," Ramirez called out. Suddenly, a guard appeared, his weapon trained on the lieutenant. Without hesitation, Philip threw himself in front of her. Searing pain exploded across his chest as the plasma bolt struck him. As darkness closed in, Philip heard Ramirez shout, "Cannons disabled!" Then, nothing. The acrid smell of burnt circuitry filled Philip's nostrils as he limped down the corridor of the Horizon's medical bay. His body ached from the recent ordeal, but his mind raced with the gravity of their situation. He pushed open the door to Jessica Ramirez's room, finding her propped up in bed, her face etched with pain and frustration. "Lieutenant," Philip said, his voice hoarse, "how are you holding up?" Jessica's eyes blazed with intensity. "Ready to get back out there, sir. We can't let those Draxion bastards win." Philip nodded, understanding her drive. "We've got a fight ahead of us, that's for sure. But first, we need to regroup." A swift knock on the door interrupted them. Boron entered, his antennae twitching with agitation. "Philip, we've received new intel. It's not good." Philip's stomach clenched. "What is it?" Boron's multifaceted eyes blinked rapidly. "The Draxion Emperor has sent an advanced strike force. They're moving to secure a foothold in our space." "Damn," Philip muttered. He turned to Jessica. "Looks like you'll get your chance sooner than expected, Lieutenant. We're going to need every fighter we can muster." Over the next few hours, Philip and Boron huddled with their top strategists, poring over star charts and tactical readouts. The tension in the war room was palpable as they formulated their plan. "We hit them before they can dig in," Philip said, his finger tracing a path through the holographic display. "A surgical strike to take out their vanguard." Boron nodded in agreement. "We'll need our best for this. A rapid response unit, combining the strengths of both our species." As the strategy took shape, Philip assembled his team. Hardened veterans from a dozen battles stood shoulder to shoulder with Tarkalian warriors, their bodies augmented with cutting-edge tech. At the front of the group stood Jessica Ramirez, her eyes burning with a fierce willpower. "This is it," Philip addressed the assembled strike force. "We stop them here or we lose everything. Are you with me?" A chorus of affirmatives rang out, human voices mixing with the clicks and chirps of Tarkalian's speech. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Battle plans were memorized. And then, with a series of precisely timed warp jumps, they were off. The strike force emerged from warp in perfect formation, their ships arrayed around the mouth of a swirling wormhole. Philip's hands tightened on the controls of his fighter as the first Draxion ships began to appear. "All units, engage!" Philip barked into his comm. The space around them erupted in a furious firefight. Philip's fighter dove and weaved through the chaos, plasma bolts sizzling past his cockpit. He watched as human and Tarkalian boarding parties latched onto the hulls of Draxion vessels, cutting their way inside. The comm crackled with the sounds of close-quarters combat. "We've breached the command deck!" Jessica's voice rang out, punctuated by the whine of energy weapons. For a moment, it seemed like victory was within their grasp. But then, a new voice cut through the chatter, cold, cruel, and undeniably Draxian. "You insects think you've won?" the voice sneered. "You've merely sealed your doom." A series of explosions rocked the captured Draxian ships. Philip watched in horror as entire sections of hull were blown away, exposing crew and boarders alike to the vacuum of space. "Kragath!" Philip snarled, recognizing the Draxian warlord's handiwork. Voice. Philip's blood ran cold as he realized the true extent of Kragath's ruthlessness. "All units fall back!" Philip shouted into his comm. "It's a trap!" But it was too late. The explosions had torn massive holes in the Draxion ships, and the vacuum of space began to claim its victims. Philip watched helplessly as human and Tarkalian soldiers were sucked out into the void, their bodies going limp in the freezing emptiness. "We need to regroup," Boron's voice crackled over the comm. "This battle is lost." Philip gritted his teeth, his hands clenching the controls of his fighter. "Negative. We can't let Kragath gain a foothold here. We need a new plan." As the remaining Allied forces regrouped, Philip and Boron huddled in the war room of the horizon, their faces grim. The holographic display showed the advancing Draxion armada, a sea of red dots slowly engulfing their position. "We are outnumbered and outgunned," Boron said, his antennae twitching nervously. "Perhaps we should consider a strategic retreat." Philip shook his head. "No. If we run now, we'll never stop running. We need to hit them where it hurts." Lieutenant Ramirez limped into the room, her face pale but her eyes burning with intensity. "Sir, I have an idea. What if we turn their own tactics against them?" Philip raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "The Draxians used our boarding parties against us," Ramirez explained. "What if we did the same, but on a larger scale? We could use the Tarkalian cloaking technology to slip past their defenses and infiltrate their command ship." Boron's multifaceted eyes blinked rapidly. "It's risky, but it might be our only chance." Philip nodded, a plan forming in his mind. "We'll need our best operatives for this. Ramirez, you'll lead the infiltration team. Boron and I will coordinate the distraction force." Over the next few hours, they put their plan into action. Using advanced Tarkalian cloaking technology, they managed to slip a small team of elite human and Tarkalian operatives past the Draxion blockade. Ramirez led the infiltration team, her face set with steadfast perseverance as they approached the massive Draxion command ship. Meanwhile, Philip and Boron launched a daring frontal assault, drawing the Draxians' attention away from the infiltration team. The space around them erupted in a furious firefight, human and Tarkalian ships weaving through the chaos. Philip's fighter dodged and rolled, plasma bolts sizzling past his cockpit. He watched as Allied ships exploded around him, their crews vaporized in an instant. But still, they pushed on, buying time for Ramirez and her team. Inside the Draxion command ship, Ramirez and her squad moved silently through the shadowy corridors. They encountered minimal resistance at first. The Draxions focused on the battle raging outside. But as they neared the ship's nerve center, alarms began to blare. "We've been made," Ramirez hissed into her comm. "Moving to Plan B." They fought their way through waves of Draxion soldiers, their weapons cutting through the alien flesh with brutal efficiency. Ramirez felt a searing pain in her side as a plasma bolt grazed her, but she pushed on, ignoring the blood seeping through her armor. Finally, they reached the command center. Ramirez planted the explosive charges as her team held off the Draxion reinforcements. With seconds to spare, they retreated to their extraction point. Outside, the battle had reached a fever pitch. Philip's fighter was barely holding together, smoke pouring from multiple hull breaches. Suddenly, his comm crackled to life. "Charges set," Ramirez's voice came through, strained but triumphant. "Get clear." Philip barked orders to the Allied fleet, and they began to pull back. The Draxians, sensing victory, pressed their attack. but their eagerness would be their undoing. A massive explosion ripped through the Draxion command ship, tearing it apart from the inside. The shockwave rippled through space, catching many of the pursuing Draxion ships and sending them spiraling out of control. As the debris settled, Philip allowed himself a moment of hope. But that hope was short-lived. Through the wreckage of the command ship, a new threat emerged. A massive, heavily armored battle walker, overflowing with weapons capable of decimating entire fleets. Kragath's cold, cruel voice echoed through the comm channels once more. "You insects think you've won? You've merely awakened the beast." Philip watched in horror as the battle walker's weapons charged up, preparing to unleash devastation on the Allied forces. He knew that the real fight was only just beginning. The sky blazed with the fiery trails of Draxion warships descending upon the Tarkalian colony. Boron's antennae twitched anxiously as he surveyed the smoldering ruins around him. The acrid stench of burnt metal and flesh filled the air. "Sir, we found something," a Tarkalian scout called out. Boron rushed over, his multifaceted eyes widening at the sight before him. The twisted wreckage of Philip's vehicle lay scattered across the ground, its antimatter core a gaping hole of destruction. "By the cosmic web," Boron breathed. Amidst the debris, they found Philip's body. His skin was charred and blistered, his uniform in tatters, but incredibly, impossibly, his chest still rose and fell with shallow breaths. "Get him to the medical bay," Boron barked. "Now!" Tarkalian medics swarmed around Philip, carefully lifting his broken form onto a hovering stretcher. They raced through the rubble-strewn streets, dodging falling debris as Draxion bombs rained down around them. Inside the makeshift triage facility, Tarkalian surgeons worked feverishly to stabilize Philip. Their insectoid appendages moved with incredible precision, sealing wounds and administering life-saving treatments. "His injuries are severe," one surgeon reported. "It's a miracle he's still alive." Outside, the ground shook as a massive figure strode through the devastation. The Draxion Emperor, his obsidian armor gleaming in the fires of destruction, led the charge against the beleaguered defenders. Boron watched in horror as the Emperor wielded a blade that seemed to drink in the very light around it. With each swing, entire squads of Tarkalian shock troops were obliterated, their energy weapons useless against the Emperor's defenses. "We need reinforcements!" Boron shouted into his communicator. "Where's Lieutenant Ramirez?" As if in answer, a battered human dropship roared overhead. It touched down amidst a hail of Draxion fire, its doors slamming open to reveal Ramirez. Her face was pale, a hastily applied bandage visible beneath her armor, but her eyes burned with fierce drive. "Boron," she called out. "We've got one shot at this. Philip's plan, the singularity projector. It's our only hope." Ramirez's troops fanned out, setting up the experimental weapon. Its barrel hummed with barely contained energy as they aimed it at the advancing Draxion forces. "Fire!" Ramirez ordered. A beam of distorted space-time lanced out, enveloping the Draxion war machines. For a moment, it seemed to work. The alien technology began to warp and twist. But then the Emperor stepped forward, his terrible blade absorbing the quantum disruptions. With a gesture, he unleashed a shockwave that sent Ramirez and her forces flying. Boron helped Ramirez to her feet, both of them staring in disbelief as the Emperor approached, flanked by his Praetorian guard. "Surrender!" the Emperor's voice boomed across the battlefield, "or watch as I exterminate your entire race." Despair threatened to overwhelm Boron, but then a blinding light erupted from the medical facility behind them. Philip Perry emerged, his body no longer flesh and blood, but pure energy given form. His eyes, twin stars of defiance, fixed upon the Draxion Emperor. "Your reign ends here," Philip's voice resonated across reality itself. The two titans clashed, their battle shaking the very foundations of the universe. Singularities formed and collapsed around them as they traded blows that could shatter planets. Boron and Ramirez rallied their remaining forces, engaging the Emperor's guards in a desperate bid to buy Philip time. Human and Tarkalian fought side by side, their disparate strengths combining into a formidable whole. The battle raged on, reality itself buckling under the strain. And then, in one final cataclysmic moment, Philip channeled the very essence of humanity's spirit into a lance of pure will. The Emperor's defenses shattered. His blade crumbled to dust. His armor fell away like ash on the wind. As the defeated Emperor vanished into the void, Philip turned to his friends. His radiant form flickered, growing dimmer by the second. "This is the price of defiance," he said, his voice echoing across the cosmos. "The human spirit burns brightest in the face of oblivion, but even our fires must eventually fade." And with those words, Philip's light winked out, leaving Boron and Ramirez standing amidst the ruins of their once great civilizations. In the distance, the remnants of the Draxian fleet fled, their will to fight broken by the loss of their emperor. A fragile peace settled over the colony, but the cost had been beyond measure. Boron turned to Ramirez, seeing the weight of all they had endured etched in her eyes. "What now?" he asked. Ramirez looked out at the devastation around them, then back to Boron. "We rebuild," she said firmly. "Together. It's what Philip would have wanted." And so, in the years that followed, human and Tarkalian worked side by side to forge a new future from the ashes of the old. The memory of Philip's sacrifice drove them forward, a beacon of hope in the face of an uncertain future.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.